So this morning, today, we have the delight, the privilege to have with us Stephen Jenkinson, who was supposed to be with us live and with his band at our event.
Live event. Actually, in California. To rephrase it even more, at the event in October in California, the live event, that was the highlight. The concert of Stephen would have been the highlight, was designed to be the centerpiece of the meal, just the... And so we are delighted that we can have this version, this limited version together still to show his wisdom, and you will hear also his amazing music. Yeah. And so it's a joy and an honor. Sorry.
It's a compromised version, but you get a taste of his offering and the band. So I'm just going to do it a very brief introduction, Stephen, the formalities to take care of the introduction, and then we go straight into conversation.
Yep.
So Stephen Jenkinson is a storyteller, teacher, author, musician. He has worked for over 2 decades in palliative care and counseled over 1,500 people on their deathbeds. He is the author of the award-winning book, Die Wise, a Manifesto for Sanity and Soul. His most recent book is Come of Age, The Case of Elderhood in Times of Trouble. Very much needed. Stephen is the founder and principal instructor of the Orphan Wisdom School, which convenes in Tramer, Canada. He teaches internationally, and he has the band with Gregory Hoskins, and they have toured continents in the last 2 years, I believe, year or 2 years. 5 years.
5 years?
Okay.
Wow.
Sorry. Yes. 5 years offering nights and of grief and mystery shows. And
there will be 2 albums released at the end of October, Dark Road and Rough Gods. And the one thing, you must see this movie, Grief Walker. You must see this movie, Grief Walker. It features Stephen. It's an amazing movie, so profoundly touching. We just watched it 2 nights ago again. It's really a beautiful piece of art. It's really yumminess. Yes.
So welcome, Stephen. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for the invitation. By the way, I should say before we begin, or as we begin, that I was listening carefully to the list of attributes and accolades that people were showering over their experience. I guess it was yesterday, and how they're feeling today. And I think you have me in here as an antidote to all of that excitement.
we need that. This is exactly where I want to start, actually, the antidote. So we live in a culture that does not like endings, a culture that likes exponential growth, anything that has to do with beginnings, with growth, with expansion, extraction. It's very welcome in our Western culture. And that has, so the inquiry is like how our denial of death has led us to live, to create and face the current crises and challenges in the world, the extinction of species, the climate collapse. How is that connected? Is it connected to the denial of death? And then,
You know, I think in order to engage in a denial of death, I'm familiar with the book as you are, the title, but I think it's probably overstated. It's not clear to me that at least I am part of a culture that denies death. In order to deny death, you have to have some kind of engagement that's prolonged enough and sustained enough to call into deep disrepute or disregard the thing you're engaged with. I don't see that. So I'm suggesting to you that I don't think we're in a death-denying culture. That credits the culture with too much alertness around dying. I think probably that we're in the Western culture, to generalize, is much more death-phobic than it is death-denying. And the difference sounds subtle, and it probably is, but I think it goes like this. when you're deeply fearful of something, you're not necessarily informed about it, but you know just enough to stay away as best as you can, right? So it is, in a sense, an informed position, death phobia, but it's not informed by the realities of dying. It's informed by the prejudices that we bring to it, which was actually the basis of your question, I think. So what might the connection be? Well, you know, my country, Canada, it was a consequence of spontaneous, mostly involuntary and mass migration from Europe. And it was an accident. It would never wanted to be a country. It didn't know how to be a country, and it still doesn't. It's not a unified culture. It's a European fantasy that has never quite happened. And that's what America is. It's a European fantasy. It's not a North American thing at all. And the vision was everything could be better than it was. People could be free of the old tribal dilemmas and the rest. Of course, the first thing they unpacked when they arrived on these shores was all the old tribal dilemmas and everything they were trying to escape. That's the nature of escape, is that you drag with you the thing you're trying to escape. If you don't do so, then the mechanics of your escape are useless. There has no foil to engage, right? So as a consequence of that, we left behind so many things that gave us could have given us a sense of cultural continuity over time. And when that's ruptured, and it certainly has been for North Americans, then there's no continuity experienced between the living and the dead either, because it's the culture that establishes your lived engagement with what is no longer so, no longer here. Minus that cultural continuity, you can't experience it existentially or spiritually or in any other way, and it becomes an allegation. And the deep disrepair of the thing, or the disintegration of it, has resulted in this notion of personal truth or personal experience, that's the only kind of truth there is. In actual fact, there's nothing personal about the truth. The more personal and interior you make death, the less profound and less available it becomes.
Okay, can we unpack this last piece? This is like, yeah. So the less we make it, the more we make it personal, the less we are capable to be present with it, to be...
Well, perhaps the emphasis is on the wrong syllable here. So the idea that we are going to be present to death, I think, puts too much emphasis on our orientation. So here's the thing. Death is a god. This is, I think, enormously useful and compelling thought to think. Death is a god. It's a deity. In order to come to an understanding of what this possibly means, you have to investigate your understanding of what you think constitutes deity or godliness. And when you do that, you find out very quickly that many of the attributes that you heap upon the divine may not be divine attributes at all. They are what we want from the divine, but they may not be divine in any way at all. For example, commandments, to choose an obvious example, the notion that the divine makes demands of humans, and that's what it's there for, to get satisfied by us, sounds like an idea that we came up with, to be honest. It doesn't sound very divine to me. It sounds very graspingly human to me. So if you're willing to take some understanding of what divine is and apply it to the understanding of dying, then you might credit dying with a kind of sentience that's not human, but it's not anti-human either. It's not anti-life. It's the origin of life.
It's a life force. That is a life force.
It's the origin of life. It's, if I had a handful of dirt in my hand right now, and I showed it to you and I asked you, how do we come by this? The answer inescapably is things have to die to end up with that dirt. No death, no dirt, no dirt, no life. Very simple.
Yeah.
But in a kind of growth addicted culture, in a limit defying culture, such as the one you characterized that we're all participating in, be not surprised that we're trying to live a life of hydroponic spirituality, if you will. Spirituality that has no earth, only sustained by a sort of a flood of chemically laced liquid. I'd never thought of that until just now, but it strikes me as
I love it.
that works kind of, no?
I love it.
Yeah.
Hydroponic spirituality is, I want to tattoo it, or so make a sticker. It's totally a great definition of where we are.
Yeah. So, okay, so how is death a god then? Well, it has a presence so adamant, but so undetermining of the consequence. Here's what I mean. I believe you're going to play a story song in a little while called Fate, or a piece of the Fate, which is actually in 4 sections. Now, this word fate comes to us from the Romans. Fatum was the verb that the best way to characterize it in English is to say that which the gods have said. Now, you know what fate means today? Fate means nothing you can do. And so it's no surprise that there's a very close alliance in contemporary English between fate and fatal. You see, nothing you can do, you involuntarily come to it, and you succumb rather than submit. That kind of idea. So in actual fact, though, the Romans understood the world to have been made by what the gods said. The Romans didn't invent this idea, but they were good practitioners of it. But there's a half that's missing in the contemporary understanding. Fate never meant that's the way it's going to go no matter what we do. Fate meant this. Now the gods have spoken. That's what physics and chemistry is. That's what evaporation and photosynthesis is. That's what gravity and light, and that's what the gods said. Now that they have spoken, what will you do? So that remains to be seen, you see? And that's not a given, and it's not foreclosed upon. That's the way the God of death works. The God of death, if you will, speaks your end to you. And the God of death does not speak of your end only at the end. The God of your death has been whispering in your ear the whole time. And that's what everyone's death before yours is for. It's for you to practice so that you don't come to your dying as a grasping, desperate amateur. It's a very unbecoming circumstance, no? I'll give you a chance to respond in a second. Sorry, I'm on a bit of a roll here.
It's okay.
No, it's beautiful.
One more piece to it then.
Yes.
The allegation constantly is that everybody knows they're going to die. And sooner or later in this conversation, we're going to come around to the plague, no doubt. And you're going to ask me some version of, do I think that the plague has heightened our awareness around dying? But for the moment, let me make this observation for you. No.
Not our plan.
Okay. Apparently we're all from the same tribe then. So I will ask a room full of people that when I used to be able to be in a room full of people in the old days, and I would say, everyone in this room who knows they're going to die, please raise their hand. And of course, they came to see me, so they figure the right answer is yes. Even though some of the new age people there might have different plans that don't include dying, just, transformation and things of this kind. But the lion's share of people will raise their hand, quite sure that they're on the right side of history and God and this conversation and me. And then I developed the following idea. I say something like, do you know, there was a time in my life when everybody knew there was enough oil for everyone forever. They did know that. Now, The truth of the matter was that that was never true. We know that it was never true, but I didn't say it was true. I said that people knew it. And how could you tell that they knew it? And the answer is by how they behaved and how they lived their lives. And that knowledge informed their buying practices, you know, their decisions about how to go into debt and for what, and so on and so on. But it was never true, but it was known nonetheless, and it determined how people live. Take out oil and put in death, and then wonder whether or not you can trace the presence of the knowledge of death and how people in the West tend to live their lives ordinarily, not in spectacular moments, but in the ordinary moments. Can you see any evidence at all that this death is a known thing, regardless of the fact that they can claim that they know it, but you can't find the signs, you see? What you find is the signs of aversion, of choosing otherwise. And so the remarkable, the deified understanding of dying is that you can assume all of these positions of prejudice and torment and vainglory and so on. And the God of death is simply nodding, not arguing, not disputing, not forcing him or her or itself upon you, simply understanding that the fullness of time will deliver the verdict on how likely your prejudices are to prevail. It's a very powerful piece of business, and it's there all the time, and it's fundamentally not personal. It's not the God of your death. You don't own your death any more than you own your life or your body. These things are on loan, right? Temporarily, with some kind of trust involved. And I would say that your death and mine, even though I'm using the possessive there, but the death that will come to you and to me is something that's also loaned to us at the moment of our inception, not when we're diagnosed with some kind of cancer, you know, acres before then. So this is what I mean by death as a deity.
Just to continue that, like what comes to in my psyche is what I see is the tantric path and how that is being worshipped for centuries as a deity in India, the burning gods and the relationship. Like, yes, Kali is a representation of that and is being worshipped on a daily basis. But I don't think this is the kind of worshipping of that you're talking about. How does it look like that as a god in our contemporary lives? How would our lives feel? I don't want to look like, but feel like. How would we move around and breathe life if our lives are infused by the perfume of death?
Yeah, very good. Well, first of all, the fact that you have to ask the question signals to all of us listening that it's not the case.
Yeah.
If it were the case, it would be a kind of a self-evident thing. It would be something like gravity or sunlight. We would say, this is how it works. And, you know, we're informed by it every day. You have to ask because you don't see it. And I have to wonder about it because I don't either. So that's the first thing to notice, is that we're laboring in the absence of this presence and this understanding. See? So can you imagine, for example, if the God of death took our unwillingness to engage it personally? Can you imagine what the response might be, even of a godly presence? Could it be something, could there be some kind of retribution, some kind of punishment, some kind of payback for our failure to keep up our end of the arrangement with death? You could well imagine it. And of course, there's lots of mythology about that very thing. And the worship of dying might include the effort to placate it, to just give it enough milk and cookies to leave us alone until the fateful hour kind of thing. In actual fact, though, what I'm talking about has nothing to do with worship in that sense or placating in that sense. I'm talking about something that's closer to an understanding of friendship than it is of placating or paying or bargaining. Friendship. So what's the nature of friendship, as I understand it, goes something like this. The deep mark of a friend is the willingness to risk the friendship for the sake of the friend that you're claiming, such that on the other side of the interaction, the friendship may have broken, but the willingness to proceed in its name is still there. So by the same token, if death comes to you early in your life, you might experience that as a betrayal. And no doubt many people have done so, especially in the death of children, which I was attending to quite a bit when I was working. But it's no less a faithful God if the God sits beside a 4-year-old girl with emphysema or leukemia than it is sitting beside someone who's afflicted with COVID-19 in a hospital right now as we speak and dying accordingly, right? In other words, there's no punishment in our engagement with endings. The only way it becomes a punishment to us is because we insist that it's not part of the natural order of things. That if it's natural, it means it's agreeable to us. Well, that's not what natural means. Every time they sell you toilet paper with the word natural on it, you should just not use the word natural for the rest of your life, because you lose track of what it means. I mean, the wild is a very natural occurrence, and it's not very interested in our domesticating instincts or our desire to have a safe and managed life, for example. So the God of death is much more like a wild animal than the part of us that wants to be soothed and reassured about things.
Yeah, when you say that, it comes to mind when we hear that a young person is dying or is ill. Immediately, what we do is like, but why? It makes no sense. It should not be. Like, we want to argue and reason rationally because we believe that death has an order. It has its place in the order of things. But what you're saying is there is no order, there is no logic, we can't really wrestle with death.
No, you can, and I think you should from time to time. Just understand that you will lose.
Yeah.
Right? But don't forget Rilke's beautiful observation that we are not here to win. We're here to be defeated by greater and greater things. And if we proceed that way, we can brag about what defeated us. And to be brought low by death is a very honorable outcome to an honorably lived life. It just takes an enormous act of the will or other things in you to be willing to have that be so, instead of having things work out according to your understanding of what the sequence should properly be. Look, we all know that it's not actually true that there's not a general natural order to things wherein the death of the old precedes the death of the young. That's a recognizable part of the natural order of things, but it's not absolutely so. The exceptions are as naturally occurring as the order is. This is where we run into very hard times, because we try to turn this apparently meaningless flip of the usual order into one of two things. Either random chaos, we make meaninglessness a meaning, or we go to punishment, payback, bad outcome, too many hamburgers, too much stress, whatever it was. And that's the reason why. Yeah.
Yeah, and that again is very much part of our Western culture. Knowledge, predictability, control is how we live. That's how what we believe sustains our lives, that kind of. And I just want to go back to what you said. So in a way, our European ancestors coming here, they brought their trauma, they brought their wounds, and they actually the rest was ways to run away from those wounds. So all this need to control and to predict and to exploit comes from the unwillingness to be with those wounds, Asian pain. So the question is like, what is at the sorrow of our Western soul? What is the hollowness or the sorrow at the heart of our Western civilization? Is it we've lost our sense of belonging, our sense of, yeah, I mean, in Europe, where we come from, death is part of life. It's part of the village. Like when somebody dies, the body is carried through the village. The
Everybody
village
knows
comes
it,
together
yeah.
and eats together and cries together and celebrates. And these were the old ways of being with endings. Like you said, was not a private affair. There was no such a thing as private. And here we are now have the fancy mortuaries that everything is behind closed doors and looks perfect, looks controllably.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah, and you don't want to disturb your neighbor with your death. You know, you don't want to show your grief out loud. You don't want to show the casket going through the streets. You know, you try to hide it and sterilize. No, it's okay. You know, where we are from is like, it's a celebration.
Okay. So here's a question for you. I get to ask a question now.
Yay.
Could go something like this. Who are we to you? Who are we North Americans to you Europeans?
Yes.
So give me a second to elaborate the question. Do you ever think of us? I know you live in North America, so I have to ask you to imagine this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But do you ever think of us and then ask me if we ever think of you? Who have we become to you? So this is a very distressing possibility that I'm suggesting to you here, because I would like you to consider the real possibility that what North Americans are is what Europeans became. We are the near future of this place that you were so admiring of just a few minutes ago.
Beautiful.
You see, this is exactly, folks, what globalization is.
Yes.
Okay. Globalization is not heading towards an Italian village in the Alps. That's not what it's going to. It's going to the reason that we're having this discussion. This is where it's headed. This is the global village that it wants to make, where there's no fundamental distinction between how you do your dying in Italy and how we do our dying in Canada, and so on and so on. No, that's one. Two, you know, the answer to your question that I would give you is homelessness. In a word, the principal affliction of the West is the inability to belong. So you claim ownership instead of being able to belong. You claim dominion instead of being able to belong. And catch this, the etymology of the word belong tells us plainly that it does not mean what we use it to mean today. When we say belong, we say, all my sorrows are gone, especially the sorrow around solitude and loneliness, because I belong to something greater than myself and all is well. I mean, it doesn't work in China, but never mind that. The actual word means this. The prefix, how should I put this to you? The prefix in Old English intensifies the word that follows it. So the be in front is not the verb to be as we use it today. The be in front tells you that whatever follows this has been deepened and intensified and made more adamant as a consequence of this prefix. So lo and behold, if you achieve a belonging, it's not the end of your longing. It's an intensification of your longing. And the capacity to live in longing is the antidote to living in desire and striving. Even though they're used today as synonyms, they're not. If you've ever longed after someone or something, you know very well that the longing itself puts you in the presence of what you're longing for. Whereas desire clearly signals that you're living in the absence of what you desire. It's fascinating. The other thing is desire is forever trying to satisfy itself, to get the object of its desire and to end the desiring. It doesn't work for very long, but it works for a while. But the goal of longing is not to stop longing. The goal of longing is to be ever a more adequate practitioner of it. And so I think a citizen of an established culture understands this and lives accordingly. Whereas the citizen of an uncertain and shaky pseudo culture like North America is forever confusing longing with desire and ownership with being able to inhabit, deeply inhabit a place without having to own it, you see. So our homelessness, that's a consequence of the migration that we talked about earlier. This is the fundamental contributor to our inability to die well and wise or at all. We get annihilated, but we don't tend to die, because die means that you're participating actively in what the dying is asking of you, not doing to you, asking of you.
I want to go in the two pieces that I would like to explore with you. And the first is the longing. That kind of longing is also at the heart of all the mystical traditions, correct? And the longing comes from often that we are separate from God. And the longing is to go back to oneness. And so how do we, like as a spiritual practitioner, how do we wrestle with this apparent paradox for the mind that life is eternal, it doesn't have a beginning and an end, and at the same time, it's finite in this human form. And the longing that is connected to that realization of finite and infinite. What do you have to reflect on that?
Okay. First of all, the proper answer is I don't really know. That's an honest answer, but me not knowing has never prevented me from wondering out loud about something. So I'll try to do that now. Well, first of all, it's not just human beings who end. It's not just human life that's finite. From what I can tell, every life form has a finitude as part of its nature, you see. So we can take instruction from that if we're willing and recognize that finitude is not a human burden or a human affliction. We appear to be the only life form that tries to engineer alternatives to that. I'm not thinking of Elon Musk and all of that stuff, although that too. But I'm thinking even of all the spiritual practices that appear to be designed to leap over the chasm of this separation that you're alluding to and re-achieve some kind of oneness. Presumably, if this oneness exists, well, there's no real dying because there's no real ending, because it's all a continuum, and isn't that great? Back to the mothership, that kind of thing. Well, that understands dying to be some kind of booby prize, some kind of consequence of the separation, you see. And this is a very biblical understanding, I should tell you. It's directly from the Judeo-Christian tradition that, you know, the book of Genesis tells you very plainly, there was no death in the world until there was disobedience. And disobedience prompted, the consequence of disobedience was punishment. And the punishment was not only dying, but knowing that you were going to die. That was the principal affliction. So this is in my view, I just say this humbly, it's a terrible misapprehension of what's granted to you. If we really were going to last forever, this would be horrible news for the world, wouldn't it? I mean, we're lasting 80 or 90 years and it's bad enough for the world. Eternity would be unendurable for the world. And I'm not sure it'd be great for us either. Right? And I sound glib, but I do really mean that. Right? So finally, I would say that the act of longing is the union. That's the union. It doesn't come from the goneness of all of that. The ability to long after the union with the divine, let's say, just to say it very briefly, is your union with the divine. That ability to long after union with the divine was granted to you by the divine. You see, just enough separateness to prompt you into longing, just enough longing to in the better times of your life to assure you about the separateness. What an amazing architecture.
So,
speriamo.
Speriamo. I'm still 5 questions behind. You said in one of your in one of the interview we heard, you were talking about euthanasia, and that's something that really struck me how you presented it, and it made so much sense to me, but it was so I didn't expect it. I didn't expect your analysis because I thought that's perfect. We can choose. You basically are busting all my myth about. I thought I was so in touch with my desire not to die. I don't want any pain. And then when it's too much, I'm gonna do it. And I thought I was the coolest thing in town. And you kick my butt left and right. Can you please talk about this desire that we have as a culture to control life and control the end of this care? Because that was so fascinating, and I want to share it with our family here, with our circle.
This is not going to win me any friends, what I'm about to say.
Well, you won me as a friend on that, because it was so left-wing for me, left side. It came so much from the other side that it completely rocked my world and made me see the whole aspect. You really cracked me in thousands of pieces, and I thank you for that.
Very sinister, no? Sinistre.
Sinistro.
Very sinister, yeah. Okay. Let me see what I can do about this. I haven't thought about this for quite a while. You're asking me my antique things. Well, I live in a country where euthanasia is completely legalized across all the dominion. And this is fairly recent. And I was there when it was illegal and criminal to do so. I was there when this was being challenged and wondered about. I was there when the really rancorous discussions were going on. And I was gone by the time they legalized it. So what I'm about to tell you comes from being there, not from having an attitude or opinion about it. So if you listen carefully to the people who are advocating for euthanasia, one of the things you heard consistently was that there's no merit in suffering beyond a certain point, and that euthanasia is a solution to that suffering. Okay. And it's particularly useful for the existential suffering unto death that its advocates believe is an inherent part of dying. That's the big one. So the prejudice about death that the pro-euthanasia brigade carried went like this. Dying is inherently suffering engendering. Okay. Beyond a certain point, we can't remain conscious and endure that suffering. That's how bad it is to die. And so we either tranquilize and sedate ourselves to kingdom come until we're taken out, or we take the process into our hands and decide when and if and how. If you pay attention to the formula, one of the things you quickly see, and you alluded to it, is that euthanasia is an exercise, another exercise in personal dominion. That's principally what it is. And in so doing, it fails to challenge the fundamental prejudice about dying that it carries, which is this: dying is inherently suffering making. Why? Because you don't get a choice in it. That's why, because it's bigger than you. But why is that suffering making? See, the answer is, if you live in a culture that's addicted to self-determination, then death is the great insult. See, it's a kind of moral no man's land. So as I saw this begin to unfold, one of the questions I began to ask is, are you sure that euthanasia absolves you of suffering? In other words, what makes you think that reconstituting self-determination, being in control, is the key to the suffering unto death? Why did you never consider the real possibility that it's the addiction to self-determination that makes dying so hard to bear? In other words, I was interviewed in a local radio station here years ago, and they said, the leadoff question is, what is it about death that's so hard in our time? And I said, what is it about our time that makes dying so hard? There.
Yeah.
And so if you don't wonder about the prejudice you bring to dying and you advocate for euthanasia, you end up missing the point entirely. And what you've done in my country is legalize a system now where soon enough, nobody will have a memory of a time when you couldn't choose your own death. That will be gone as a lived memory, number one. Number two, the death phobia that informed the seeking after euthanasia in the first place remains intact, goes underground for another couple of generations. And when it appears again, I can't even guess what form it'll take. You know, the struggle around euthanasia was our great opportunity to wonder about the nature of our death phobia, but the wonder never really happened. We were just looking for another solution to the thing we didn't want to think about. And that's what we've got now in my country and in other places. And lo and behold, children will grow up with the idea that death is unendurable without the guarantee of euthanasia alongside it to make it doable and to make it mine. And that's what I meant at the beginning when I said, when you personalize dying, you leach it of its profundity and you turn it into another spectacle of self-determination.
So basically, euthanasia becomes the death of the hydroponic spirituality life. In a way, right? So it's just is a baseless, soilless, without the compost of life. You try to control the living and avoiding the, yeah.
We should say as a PS, I'm not saying for 1 minute that there's not times of such cruel physical pain and so on, that this becomes unendurable. I'm not saying that there's no such thing. Of course there's such a thing.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not a moral authority. And so can I just dictate when euthanasia should be applicable and when it's not? No, these are things are subtle and you have to work them out. And, you know, it's a cultural labor to do so. But I do stand beside the idea that the legalization of euthanasia by a death phobic culture preserves the death phobia while appearing to change it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Hey, I'll tell you what, ask all the people how they're feeling now.
Well, why don't we do that?
Let's write a little
write
word.
one word in the chat. How are you doing? Feeling inspired, still cool, confused, connected, grateful,
alive,
gratitude,
affirmed, perplexed,
open, perplexed,
expanded,
alive,
just fine,
serene,
alive, fascinated. It was just an epiphany.
No,
sobering.
You didn't do a good job. No, Steven.
How much time do we have?
Ay.
Wiser, I have curious. Yeah, it's too fast to read.
Food for thought, contemplative, guilty,
so intrigued.
Good. It's what I
More
always
questions,
thought.
awake, connected, affirmed, scared,
validated, dead,
home.
Choices individual and in the
overwhelmed,
moment. Intrigued,
alive,
in need the nuances.
Alive. Yeah. So
Thank
one
you.
last question, and then I would like to open for questions from the community. And so dying well, living well, dying well, living deeply, how is all this connected? I hate how questions. So let's see.
How do I phrase a non-how question?
Is there, and this is very Western question, oh God, any skill that we can develop during our life, while we're alive, that can prepare us for that? Is there any spiritual practice that can prepare us in any way? And I know, I hear your voice, your relationship to that is not as you dying. It's such a beautiful grappling because everything becomes futile the moment I say it. And yet I would like, is there, what does it mean even to live deeply? Or how is that connected to dying in surrender? And okay, a lot of words.
Yeah, this last thing is too vast. You know, no human being should pretend to have an answer to how do you live deeply.
Yeah.
But you know, the idea of readiness, let's talk about that for a second. The idea of preparedness. You know that this is approached as if it were an insurance policy that you can take out against the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, against the vagaries. That's what readiness is supposed to do. If you're ready, you can't be trapped. You can't be betrayed. You can't be cornered. You can't be surprised. This is the prejudice that surrounds the notion. So rather than thinking in terms of readiness for a future event, you investigate your understanding of time and you realize that your death problem is your time problem because you think your death is in the future. The event is in the future, but your death is here now.
Wow.
It's an utterly knowable fact, right? You could say your death is a knowable thing, not much known. And it's the aching place between those two extremes where we tend to live our lives in North America, from what I've seen. So if your death is in the present, then you have nothing to wait for. You don't need a terminal diagnosis to make it truer. You don't need a pandemic to make it truer. It doesn't do so. Are we not seeing 6 or 7 or 8 months into this thing now that the murmuring in the interviews that I was doing 3 or 4 months ago, where people were absolutely certain that this was the magic bullet about fatality that I'd been advocating for years, and now it's come to pass, and we're going to have such a death-informed world hereafter that we can't help but, you know, get on the right track and so on. And you can see that this is not true, that there's nothing about a near miss that helps us understand fatality. And that's what this plague is. It's a near miss. It's not nearly as bad as it was being imagined to be in February and March and April. I'm not saying it's not bad, but in terms of the number of fatalities across the world, it's far short of what people were anticipating, who were in positions of power and authority at the time and were scared shitless by the possibilities, right? And that near miss, I have to say, is doing none of us any good. Why not? Because we're already hankering after the time before the plague. When you hear this over and over again, getting back to normal, when in fact it was normal that got us to the place in the first place. That's how it happened. Okay, whatever the particular mechanics in China, and I don't pretend to know, but I don't have to know to wonder this aloud with you. That the dying that we could have been learning about seems to require our personal death to happen. When in actual fact, everyone's death before your own, and finally, the understanding of the omnipresence of death alone is all the chance you need to approach that throne of wonder and uncertainty with some humility and some curiosity and some gratitude. That's the big one. So maybe I'll end off this little piece with this. I've been asked, as you could guess, many times over the years, whether or not all that exposure to death in my working life somehow really unhinged me badly, or turned me dark and cynical and morbid, etc., and so on. And my answer consistently was something like this. Do you know what it did to me? It made me want to be alive. That's what it did to me. Other things too. But I can promise you this. I have seen what not being alive is. And the consequence of that, on my better days, obliges me to inhabit the present fact of my life with a kind of intensity that makes me hard to be with. Like here. That's where all this is coming from. I was exposed enough, not just to my personal death, but to the endings of fellow humans by the hundreds. And the consequence of that has been that I long after life, even though I'm so very much alive. That's what I meant by longing. There's some magic in it, but it's not benign magic. It's very consequential, and it's not going to submit to our control over it. That's very clear. But one way to be alive as a practice is to remember your death and to befriend it as an adversary, and therefore as an ally, not as an enemy. The presence of the adversary prompts better and deeper understanding in you. The presence of an enemy prompts your prejudice to come again and again and again.
Thank you.
And of course, if all else fails, just get the local potter to make you a cup that has death head.
Yes, beautiful.
You see? So even when you're drinking the elixir of life, oh God, that again.
You're clearly a
I
deadhead.
had a cup in India. I was cold. I was drinking.
Wow.
Thank you. So let's see if we have some questions coming from the community. Please use the raise your hand icon to signal that you would like to speak. And
You know where it is, right? If you don't, send in the chat and somebody will
below the
explain you how
participant
to...
list, you can click raise your hand. Leanne
from Nashville.
I've been there.
Hey, Stephen. I also have been making people bracelets with little skulls on them. And I was reluctant to raise my hand because you're not supposed to meet your heroes, and you're not a hero. You're not my hero, but your book was very helpful for me with my mom. And I actually want to challenge this thing around self-determination, not in a respectful way, because it also feels a little bit like the relationship. It feels like risking the friendship. And I also feel like for me, my mom found her eldership by expressing, like stepping into self-determination, first really around the aesthetics of her death. And it was such a doorway in. So the thing that I'm really interested about is the relationship of death and eldership and elderhood. For me, that has been one of the big themes of 2020. I know a lot of people in this summit have probably seen that movie, Social Dilemma. To me, it's like the biggest commercial for what happens when there's not an elder in the room. And I believe that all this death in the air is inviting elders, is inviting everyone to early eldership, like being our future ancestors now. And I'm hoping you, and I've had a lot of eldership in this summit, and I include young people in that. So I'm wondering if you can talk about this concept of eldership, this maturity of being with the height and the depth. Can you say a little bit more about that and the connection you see with death and how it doesn't go into ego?
Okay, wow, you're tacking a lot of things on the end here. We have to say this briefly because I know we don't have much time now, but my understanding of elderhood is that it's not a person. It's a function. And in that sense, it's better understood as a verb than as a noun or an adjective. And we could imagine the activity being one, first of all, the elder's responsibility is to work themselves out of a gig. That's the big one. In other words, if they're functioning as elders, okay, then there's no hunger after elderhood in the culture generally. They can hunger after other things, but they can't hunger after elderhood because it's adamantly present. There was when I was doing the book on elderhood, I came across a Georgian curse, which is absolutely blood-curdling, but very instructive about the question you've just asked. And it went like this: would that your last elder dies before the depths of your loneliness come clear to you. Good God. I mean, that's a curse of high order and high achievement, actually. But you can see that there's an understanding about the fundaments of communal life buried inside the curse. And it goes like this: your loneliness, your not solitude, but your lack of fundamental companionship is primarily a consequence of the gone into abeyance of the elders around you. That's where fundamentally where it comes from. You go to your peers for companionship as a surrogate for that fundamental companionship that the elder is to be. And it's not personal. The function of an elder to make themselves obsolete reassures you about the merits of your solitude and helps you understand that your allegation of loneliness is probably overstated. But in a circumstance where the elders have gone to the ground, or by this point, the people of your mother's generation and soon of your generation will come into their age and finally their dying time, elderless themselves, their whole life through. Ask yourself then, how likely is it that old people who've been having an elder-free life can possibly function as elders there in the last act of their own lives? This is, I mean, along with, climate collapse and a few other things, this is an unspoken calamity that is just gathering momentum as we speak now. And we can feel more the absence of elderhood by far than we can talk about the consequences of its presence. For example, I'm in Oaxaca putting the finishing touches on the book Come of Age, and I end up in a bar where a 30-something woman approaches me and asks me, what do I do? And I haven't been in that position for a long time. So I was quite compelled by it. And, you know, the mezcal was running freely. So I decided to be honest. What a ridiculous idea in a bar. And I said to her, I was working on this idea, this book about elderhood. And she said, why? Like, just like that, why? And I said, well, because I figured something happened to elders, that's why. And she said very dismissively, oh, I know what happened. I said, really, what? She said, wisdom abandoned people your age. Pause. We've got it now, she said. So the last thing I would say in response to what you said about, you know, younger people have enough to do and enough to carry by being younger people in a troubled time, that we ought not to burden them with the allegation that they can be our elders simultaneously.
Wow.
Wow.
Così fan tutti.
Thank you, Stephen.
Wow.
I mean, if you love the kids, right? If you're trying to love the kids, for God's sake, don't elevate them beyond their age.
Let them be.
I mean, how are they supposed to occupy that as well as, you know, all the other things we wish after them and for them and because of them? This 2 records that we're releasing just at the end of the month, both of them in their way are dedicated to young people. And one of them, the liner note says something like, this record belongs to the young in our midst. I leave it to them to decide if it belongs among them. That's all you can do, is make something palpable and tangible, and then basically challenge them to come through over the course of time, you see? Not in an hour, not at a weekend workshop. Jesus, no. I mean, how long did it take us to get as meagerly wise as we've become at our advanced age? So, I mean, allow the shortcomings of youth to be fully manifest.
Wow.
Thank you, Leon, for your question. Nance, I'm going to unmute you now. Let's see, are you with us?
I am here. Thank you. Thank you for all of your insight. My question is about how to be present with dying in every day. So I'm in my early 30s. I'm a social worker at a hospital with cancer patients. And the nature of my work involves a lot of transitioning from treatment to hospice.
Right.
And I myself recently got a diagnosis of pre-cancer. So my question is, how do I dance with or be present with like dying in our bodies and just dying every day for myself and others? So I don't know if I framed it correctly, but whatever insight or whatever thoughts come alive for you, I'd love to hear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you too. Well, first of all, you know, good luck with the job. And if you're doing it in a real soulful way, you won't last a long time. So if you just take that to heart and build that into your career path, you know, you won't be betrayed when it doesn't finally work out. That's the first thing. But secondly, you know, this notion, I don't know if I heard it or I insinuated it from what you said, but the notion that we're in some macabre fashion all dying all the time. This sounds good, right? And it's very user-friendly as an idea because it's so non-physical. It's metaphysical. And in that sense, we can really take that one on. And I mean, I've had people say this to me for friggin' years. Well, here's the thing. If that's true, what use is a terminal diagnosis? No, beyond that, what kind of fact is a terminal diagnosis if we're all dying all the time? Answer is, it doesn't change anything, and it shouldn't. Wait a second. I was there. You're there now. We both know that the most calamitous circumstances, sort of psychosocially, ensue from the fact that people don't let the fact of their diagnosis change everything. Right? That they try to maintain steady as she goes, normal a life as possible under the circumstances, all of that tired stuff. Okay. Can you imagine falling in love and operating by the same standard? That you're trying to live as normal a life as possible, given the love, and you're doing your best to maintain your pre-love connections and status and orientation and so on, right? You see what I'm saying, no? And I listening to myself, and I'm thinking to myself, God, you sound animated about all this. Haven't you quit doing this work like 15 years ago? Why do you still get so worked up? And I guess the answer is, shit doesn't seem to get any better. You know, for all I've tried to do and all I've tried to say, well, oh well. So it's not a big problem that way personally. But I am saying to you this. Dying is supposed to change everything. Okay? Now, prior to that, you can know that. Prior to coming to your door, you can know that. I'll leave you with this. You've heard the expression sudden death, so have I. You've probably used it. I haven't used it in a long time. Here's why. There's no such thing. What? No, there's no such thing as sudden death. How can you say that? Here's how. Your death, as you've heard me say earlier in this broadcast, is a given. Okay, it's a given now. You sitting there looking pretty good. I'm sitting here looking okay, you know, considering. And, you know, we could imagine that our death is far from us. But then you got a little whisper of a pre-something, right? And now it's not an idea anymore, is it? No. And you can feel it in your eyes and it's running down your cheeks that the consequence of this is already so. And in that sense, there's nothing more to wait for to make it truer than it is, right? Okay. We don't know if you're, quote, dying, but everybody's pre-dying. And so you're in that number at the very least, no matter what they end up telling you from your tests. You see what I'm saying? Okay. So then sudden death is a confession of truancy. You're unwilling to know that your death is already your given companion, more faithful to you than you've been ever able to be. And it's not going anywhere. It's not getting drunk and following somebody else home. It's yours. And when the time comes, it'll be sitting there in your bed, leaning in fairly gently and saying, any questions? And if you just develop the friendship now, then the back and forth comes much easier when it moves into your house for keeps. That's how.
Thank you, Nance, for your question. Thank you. We have two more minutes. Do you want to take another question, or we go
it's your
to
show, whatever you'd like to do.
You have 2 minutes.
All right. I will just read one question that seems beautiful. As a retired MD pathologist, I went to massage school in Boulder and I fell into hospice massage. I found that hospice workers are among the most joyous working in medicine. Please comment.
No, there's no comment to make. If that's what he found, isn't that great?
Right.
Well, we have another minute.
No, I'm not being flip. I'm saying that if you find exceptions to what I'm saying, consider yourself a lucky person. But please still consider the collateral damage That's the consequence of trying to function in end-of-life care in a death-phobic culture. It's not a walk in the park. Okay, and the final question would be?
Final question, it's a big question. You speak of North American death-phobic culture in contrast to indigenous ways of knowing and living. You also teach indigenous ways of living and making. Can you talk about particular cultures or teachers from with whom you have learned?
Yeah, no, first of all, the first part of this thing is not so. I didn't refer to any indigenous anything, number one. Number two, I would suggest to the questioner and to us all that it would not appear to be the case that indigenous people, however that would be defined right now, that indigenous people have a kind of congenital ability where dying and mortality and so on is concerned, and that they haven't been infected by what's infected us. I'm not persuaded that that's true at all. Finally, you know, I was indigenous once. My people were indigenous to a particular place in time once. It's been quite a while, and there's been a lot of rough roads since then. There's no doubt about it. And we can't get back there in any easy way. So I would just say, let us not, please, fetishize other people as a shorthanded way of imagining that if we can just gain access to their fetishized spiritual superiority, we're going to somehow be better off by doing so. I mean, I can't tell the difference between that and clear cutting a forest. It sounds like the same basic approach. How can I get from them what's no longer available to me in the way I live, right? So what do we do instead? What I've tried to do for years, you begin with your poverties. You do not begin with, how do I not be impoverished? If you're not willing to do that, you're not willing to do the work that could sustain whatever wisdom comes to you in these matters, you see. And if I sound cross and harsh about it, guilty.
No, you don't. You sound real. You sound truthful. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for delivering it unapologetically. That's what we need. This is the time to face it fully.
Are we about to say our goodbyes now?
Yeah.
We are. Yes.
May I go first?
Yeah.
Okay, please. Do you know, I know I was supposed to be there, and we really looked forward to it. And I really want to show you what all this could sound like with a real kick-ass band. It's really hard to imagine it, I know, but I don't have to imagine it. I've lived it. And the degree of disappointment I experienced when all of this eventually came unglued, and of course, nothing has survived it, was put me into a partnership with despair, a kind of despair I've never really known before, I have to say. And I'm remembering it now when I see you, and I remember when we were together in San Jose there a little while ago. And, you know, there was a German philosopher who said, I mean to live my life in such a way that nothing human will be foreign to me. And would that this virus and this plague get us a little bit closer to understanding that even the plague is human, and all the consequences that are ensuing from it are human. And let us learn them rather than learn an antidote to that way of being human. So that's my way of saying to you how grateful I am that you imagined that I could recreate whatever I'm able to do live, sitting in the same room with you through this godless, hopeless little screen. But maybe we've come up with something that could be useful to somebody who's overhearing. And I appreciate the honor that you've bestowed upon the people who taught me whatever I've been able to learn, and then be able to pass it on a little bit now. So thank you so much.
Wow.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you.
I can only say how in awe I am, how honored how honored I am that you are on the same planet as me, brother.
Amen.
Yeah, the word you say always touched me deeply in any way, shape, or form. Thank you, brother.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Be well. And I hope you enjoy the music you're about to hear.
Yes.
Yes, and I just wanted to say you are still offering the 4-part
Right.
live stream
Speaking series.
speaking series.
Yeah.
Lisa, can we post that in the chat?
Yeah, this fall, Stephen Jenkinson is offering a 4-part live stream speaking series, Stone Fence Sagas. To learn more about his work, you should visit the website orphanwisdom.com. And in October, the 2 albums will come also. From there, you can get the connection. You can pre-order them now, and they will deliver in the next few days. So
It's never too late to become a rock and roll performer.
You make me wonder. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for